This evening is the 18th of May 2015 and our speaker tonight is Colin. He's going to be talking about, amongst other things, horse troughs.
Thank you everyone. I must thank Roger and his secretary and the ladies for putting a couple of typing sheets up for me. And Roger was putting all this together. Just the old mic, isn't it? Where do I hold? Just check this a minute, see if it works. Oh, won't sit in there. Anyhow, I'll try to hang on to it for you, mate. Yeah, just so I've got to put it on there. Want to go? Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, well, the 18th of May at the moment, and of course I dedicate this more to Malcolm McDonald because he has put a Can We Help issue in about the Bill's troughs worldwide, and I was brought up in Meriden, and of course there was a trough across in the main street of Barrack Street, Meriden, and underneath that trough a little doggy trough, and of course a lot of the farmers in those 1920s and 30s had the horse and cart and the horse and sulky, and they'd come into town, tie up to the by the railway there, and of course the little dogs often trotted along with them, and they had a special trough for them. In any case, this has ended up as being a very interesting project, trying to find where all these troughs were. It turns out there's 3 in our district that I know of, one at Burracoppin, right on the #1 rabbit-proof fence up there, and another one at Hines Hill, right by the pub, of course. Naturally enough. And of course that one at Hines Hill has been put by the wall of the hotel, and it's a flower pot now. There was another one out at Nedlands, and these Nedlands ladies of the Historical Society did not know that trough came from the gates of Karrakatta in the 1930s, and the horse trough was there. Now it is a flower bed at Nedlands. Anyhow, just to go on, just to give you a bit of an idea, I come from an early settlement, and I'm the 5th West Australian generation, and of course I'm my mother's great-great-grandparents. They came on the 6th sailing ship. The Dents arrived here and virtually got kicked out of England, really, to be honest. They arrived here, and they arrived on the Marquis Anglesey. That was a brand new boat from England, and it got into the gauge roads there at Fremantle. They unloaded a lot of their cargo, hedgehogs, barrels and that sort of stuff, on the sandy beach. And Mrs. Dent had a child, and she had this little girl there, and she was on the sands of that beach at Fremantle. That was... I've lost myself here. I had Sophia, was the first white girl to be born in the colony, and there was 3 other boys born prior to that. Of course, everyone's claimed they were the first born in WA. but in the colony. Anyhow, it turned out that Sophia was the first girl to be born here, although she had a couple other sisters when they arrived here. And of course, then there was another sister, and I come down through Marie Dent. She was born in 3rd of September 1833, and I was born almost 100 years after that. So it makes me the 5th West Australian born generation. It's quite an interesting time to find that there's so many people did come out, and then they find they were in a pretty sharp predicament, dropped out in the middle of nowhere, and they had to hunt for a few kangaroos if they could find them, and that sort of thing. And of course that didn't go down too well with the Aboriginal people losing their food, and of course they wanted to plunder all the flour and that from the mill when they set one up. Anyhow, Marie Dent married later on when she grew up on the 21st of August 1852 to Henry Towton, Alexander Towton. He was one of the first of the 18 Parkhurst boys to be sent out. Those are the little devils that were pickpocketing and that in London. And of course they were being sent off to America to work the tobacco plantations over there. And of course their colony was screaming out for some labour. So they built this little prison in the Isle of Wight and called it the Parkhurst prison. Now they did train those little blighters into bricklaying and leather work and blacksmithing, I should say. And of course, as soon as they had obtained some degree of, they were sent out to the colonies. There's 320 of these teenage boys sent out here. And they were 10 years prior to the convicts arrived. You hear all about the convicts, but you don't hear much about the Parkhurst boys. Even prior to the Parkhurst boys coming out, there was the children sent out here. They were being saved from going to the tobacco in American tobacco companies over there. So that's another story, really. I can give you a little bit more about that child migration. They were only 10, 12 if they were lucky, and they were to look after the cooking and all that, and some of the ones that were able to establish themselves here. It took a long while for them to get set up. I did say about the fact that when Dents arrived here, they had some farm equipment, and that allowed them the valuation of that, which was also a piano with it on the beach of Fremantle. That allowed them 360 acres of this freehold land they were to get. He didn't actually take on that land. He found the troops are looking for drinks, and he got a tavern licence. And he ended up serving some of these troopers, and one didn't like being not locked out and wasn't served after hours, so he lit the roof up. It was all thatched roof, and away it went. And he had to restart again, so he wasn't very pleased over that. Anyhow, we just get away from that. We've come back to the fact that there was gold discovered here in West Australia. Now that gold was about 1880 before they really found anything much, and that was up in the Murchison originally, and then there was some found here. Although one of the Hunt, when he was putting the wells in for the early graziers to make link up through the water holes. Hunt had on his second trip out, going right up by Caughey, who was up north of Caughey, and a big Russian bloke that was a convict, he spotted this bit of gold, and him and a mate, they took off with a couple of the horses. We were going to go to South Australia without any water much, so they got hauled back. They got caught up by the troopers that was guarding them, and they were brought back, and nothing was said about this gold. And it took another 10 years before, or 15 years actually, before this gold was officially announced. Anyhow, that can be found in the book called Wish Upon a Star, all about a Southern Cross. So I think you'll find there's more about that. Anyhow, we'll get back to my early childhood. I was brought up on the farm. My grandfather and his brother were allotted a 1,000-acre block of virgin bush in 1909. So we don't have to go that very far back. And of course, that's still in my hands. So my brother's son, and he's controlling all that country now. Now, you might say, oh, why? Well, you've got to remember, there were grazing leases from 1860. They were allotted to many people. Monger's up here at Monger Lake. His sons were out there with three these big grazing leases, and I happened to farm on one for 25 years and didn't know till I got to Perth. Anyhow, from these grazing leases, they were closed off, and they were formed into farms. In 1903 and 1905, a lot of that wheat belt area became farm blocks then. Well, the first 18 were set up at Merredin. The state farm took 2 of them off. And they were 640 acres, which is a square mile. So every square mile, there was 18 square mile of these farms out of virgin bush. And of course they had to work and clear and fence it or develop it anyhow. They were called CP country, and that's conditional purchase for these farms. And when I went onto my property out south of Merredin, I went out there in 1956, 57. We had taken over 2,000 acres of CP country there, and of course they made a short term, because the bloke that had it before had 5 years and done nothing, and we only had another 5 years to do something about it, so we had to buck in and get some work done pretty quick on it. Now, this, yeah, I've gone through most of that there. Now, we find that the long spells of hot weather and that was dams had to be put down. There wasn't much in springs or anything there. It's a pretty dry area, some of that eastern wheat belt. But you see, the railway got through to Merredin in November 1892. Now that railway was put through to go to Caughey, to take water up to Caughey. They were taken up by wagon loads and trying to distill it up there too. You might have seen photos of the old giant distilleries and that. Anyhow, that railway's put through, and when they got to Merredin, Caughey found gold up there. That's when they found the first lot of gold at Caughey, and of course the government pushed on to get the railway right through to Caughey. And 10 years later, they decided they'd get that water pipe through. C.Y. O'Connor, he done the engineering work on it, and that pipeline came to Merredin in 1902. So with all that, that's why they decided they'd try to have the farming around that first lot of farms, so 18 square mile of it, 18 farms. anyhow, found that it was a little bit short on rainfall there, and they allowed 1,000 acre blocks. And that's when my grandfather and his brother in 1909 took up these blocks of land. The horses, of course, were the main thing, trying to get keep young horses going, and that was a big thing there because they aged fairly quickly when they're working hard. And of course, I must refer to my father. He was one that came from Victoria. He heard about this golden eagle. He wanted to come and get some of this gold that was in Caughey. And of course, he couldn't find anything, and he came down looking at this country around near where my mother was brought up on this farm. And of course, he married her eventually, and that's where we got the Eastern States link into that. But my grandfather, on my dad's side, he went to the Boer War, and there's a book here on the Boer War, and he's listed in that, and many other people are listed in there, of course. But him and two other brothers, and the two other brothers did not come back. But John, he was the eldest at the time, and he did come back, fortunately. Anyhow, just that there, we thought there was a lot of horses lost. There was over 3,700, I think, horses sent on World War I. But there was a lot of horses went to South Africa. I can talk more about that later. How am I going for time here?
Good, keep going.
Right. Anyhow, we find that the water troughs were virtually on the farms from hollow logs, and capped the ends on with a sheet of steel or tin, and of course they were tarred up and that to seal them. But of course the horse liked the real hot weather to put his nose in and slosh it around, and really got a messy. And of course the pigs, they weren't far behind either on that. In any case, we find that our Bill's troughs become around. This Bill's, he lost his wife about 5 years beforehand, and I've got another sheet here on that Mingon brought back from Sydney on the full story on it. And of course, him and his brother started off as a spring maker, a mattress maker in Sydney. And when he died in 1927, he left a legacy of over £90,000. So that was quite a considerable amount. He had no children. His wife wasn't able to provide that. And of course, he left that money to the RSPCA, and that was gratefully accepted by him. But he did not want to see any animals go thirsty, and that's why he wanted this legacy to provide troughs. They provided a lot of troughs in Victoria, New South Wales, all states virtually, and we had some at Merredin, and they went to Hong Kong, Malaya, all British, anything they had the red British point, they got some of the troughs right back to Britain and Ireland. So that was a big spread of those horse troughs, and I think he'll show you some of those troughs here. That was a tram near there by Oxford Street. I don't know if I know he did take...
All, excuse me, but they seem to be all built in the same style.
Not quite. Different states had different contracts to do it, you see, with that, but they're quite a plain one for Merredin area, but they're quite good though. Stood the test of time, really. And our there was a horse riding group. They done the Golden Mile. They followed the Golden Pipeline, and that was about must be 10 or so years ago, and they used that trough in Meriden as a point of interest. That was all it was. In here, now I've got all that pretty well covered. Yeah, Bill's Troughs. I've got just a little pamphlet I'll run through on here about the Bill's Trough. Wondered what these concrete horse troughs still is seen in the parts of New South Wales, Victoria. Of course, they've got to have their first. The inscriptions donated by Annis and George Bills, Australia. So these are the type that went throughout the world, really, and they were used by a miniature horse trough population. The troughs were usually empty, they usually with signs of age. Now has converted them into flower pots, and they have been removed from most of the original sites because the roadworks are a danger to traffic. Of course, that would be like Karrakatta there, as I mentioned. Angus and George Bills, they began the story in 1859, and George was born in Brighton in England. He came to Australia as a young man, and he and his brother established a wire mattress manufacturing business, Kent Street in Sydney, which operated for most of the success for many years. During the lifetime, took a keen interest in seeking out cases of human needs and gave many thousands of pounds anonymously to assist the needy folk, and George Bills died in 1927 and his wife Anne died in 1910. After providing some of the personal bequests, his will was directed to the income from the residents of his estate to be used to provide troughs for the horses, and this purpose of preventing cruelty and relieving the suffering of animals in any country. So that was pretty well shows that there. I'm going okay? Okay, you're going to give me a few more minutes on this. Anyhow, we've got some more of this to go through there, and as I mentioned earlier, Meriden still has them there, and I took measurements on them and sent them back to MacDonald down in... He tried to get something done about restoring one down at Dunsborough, but he didn't have much success, and he was very disappointed over that. I've just got one of the letters I had written with him there. And of course, with my cousin here, she happened to be in Sydney, and she picked up through the computer when she had a bit of spare time, and she came across this about the horse troughs, and there's 2.5 or 3 pages of that there, and of course there's a picture of a horse trough there. Anyhow, that will come out on up there somewhere. Anyhow, that is there for anyone who want to peruse it. And would that be all right now? Okay, I'll leave that at that. But this ragged mob, I'd like to just mention, that was 1906 when they found gold in South Africa, and of course, that bloke that leaves the legacy, I just slipped my memory here, Rhodes. And Rhodes, of course, he came across some diamonds, and he didn't want these Boers that had been in Africa since 1860, he didn't want them to go and get their diamonds, so he got Britain to come, and of course the British troops started, and they gave a big call for the colonies to come and help. So every state and New Zealand, they sent the horsemen, a lot of them from the country, and of course they asked for 2 platoons of Canadian foot troops. They weren't on horses, so they had to battle their way, but they did lose quite a few horses in that contest over there. But I'll leave you with it.
Thank you very much, Colin. I can see there's a lot of great wealth of information there. In fact, it's so much that to try and get it pacing down is quite difficult. Colin's accumulation of memorabilia that he's got is really quite precious at our historical society. We've scanned a lot of that, and we're keeping it for our records as well. So we thank Colin for actually passing on those records. I have to say some of it is really probably indicates your the way that you would have done things 50 years ago or even more with regard to writing on his books. It's really intriguing that he uses every little bit of paper and he draws lines and he uses both sides of the paper, and there's none of the paper that's wasted. And he's still got that habit, and which is just wonderful. It just shows where he's coming from. But our ladies at the Spira and also Karen have been actually transcribing a lot of his handwritten notes into type form, so that it's easy to read, and we can actually, I imagine at some time a book would be well made out of all that stuff. And full credit to you for putting all that together and letting us know all about that. So we do really appreciate that. So
I didn't mention about the fact that the stables, we had the last of the bush stables there. My father had them built enough for 2 10-horse teams. Now those 10-horse teams were very important. One would change over in the afternoon, and one team would go out about 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock. The 5 hours hard work for the horses, and then they had another one go out at 1 o'clock to about 6 o'clock. So they were pretty hard days, and of course the horses were ageing, and you're trying to keep up the supply of young colts, and that was pretty hard to keep breeding. I remember I was only a little tyke and wasn't allowed near the stallion. He'd like to trample me to death, but I was always in the way and trying to get around things. And the stable was built with big salmon gun posts, and of course had cross beams and that, and gimlet sticks across the top, and then that was all with the scrub from the lake area. It was what you see in some of the fences around, the bush fences around some of the houses. That was laid across the top of the roof, and then they had straw. Well, they grew rye straw for that because it was such long straw on it, and that was good thatching, and that was waterproof. And when we got out of the horses and got a couple of tractors, that eventually became a shearing shed, and it was the coolest shearing shed the boys reckoned around, so they were quite pleased with it. But it finished up that my brother ended up putting baled hay in it, and it couldn't get the posts all oiled up, so the white ants got into it, and a couple of years it was all full of white ants, and I had to burn the lot down.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, Colin.